All right. Hello. We are live. I'm here. I'd like to welcome everyone and introduce Dr. Catherine T.Kelly, licensed psychologist and soul healing coach. Thank you for coming tonight. Welcome.
Absolutely. I'm so grateful to be here, and it's so fun to listen to you too.
Oh, thank you. I've enjoyed watching your videos too on YouTube, actually. We're going to give out your website and stuff. You dive in a whole bunch of interesting stuff. In fact, let me just read a little excerpt from your biography so that people have a good introduction to you. Catherine T. Kelly, PhD, is a clinical health psychologist in her own psychotherapy and consulting practice. She holds a PhD in counseling psychology and completed a postdoctoral fellowship in family and community medicine while also earning a master's of science in public health. She has received specialized training from the Mind Body Medical Institute of Harvard University and has been trained in various holistic, alternative, and spiritual methods of healing. That's what I'm really interested in. She is the author of the best-selling book, Soul Health, Aligning with Spirit for Radiant Living, which has been featured in over 450 national and international radio shows and podcasts. Her second book, The Recipe for Radiance, Mastering the Art and Soul of Self-Care, is a step-by-step guide to creating an optimal self-care plan. And her latest book, which came out in February 2022, is The Healer's Path to Post-COVID Recovery. And I have to say, using her own integrative framework, the Soul Health Model, Dr. Kelly approaches her work and clients from a psycho-spiritual perspective. So fascinating. I had to get that all out there because I don't think I could have gotten it out with questions. So thank you.
Well, I tell people I live halfway between science and woo because, I do integrate everything. So I think what you summed up is great.
Okay, good. And that's really what I'm most excited about. I'll tell you, I've been to many therapists,
That's
and very,
good.
very rarely. I mean, I can say almost never. I always felt a little odd because I'm an astrologer. I
Right.
got my woo-woo self. So I sort of always hid that. And I certainly never came across someone like yourself that is this hybrid combination. Let's start with your clinical psychological side. You are a clinical health psychologist. Can you tell our audience what exactly is that and what does a clinical psychologist, health psychologist practice?
So I've been trained traditionally, meaning that I went through very traditional training in terms of learning psychotherapy. And I want to make a distinction between being a psychologist and a psychiatrist
Thank you.
because people have that question all the time.
Yes.
So psychiatrists go to medical school and they primarily, especially these days, they learn about how to provide medications, but they don't really do therapy anymore. Whereas in the early days of psychology, it used to be much more that they did everything. So they did the medications. And granted, medications are kind of a new thing over the last several years. So
Yeah.
they did the psychoanalysis, but really what's happened is that, and I'm glad for this, frankly, because I'm really much more about the person than the medication. But a clinical health psychologist really, again, you learn about the psyche, you learn about basically mind body stuff. Where I am different is that, probably 25 years ago, I started integrating much more of the soul part of this, which to me is so important because, all the research that's out there, and all of the medicine, and when I say medicine, I mean the practice of the field of medicine, it's it started with the idea that the soul was part of the body, way back when the field of medicine became the field of medicine. Basically, Hippocrates, which was considered the father of medicine, said that the soul was in every aspect of who we are. Well, look at where we are now with how we treat people. There is absolutely none, I don't want to say none, but less than 5% of practitioners actually talk about spirituality or the soul. So for me, what's different is that I don't see that there's any way I can separate it. So when I say clinical health and holistic psychologist, it's because I've merged both sides of the fence, I guess I would say. I've broken down the fence, let's put it that way. And so I do a lot of talk therapy, but I do a lot of soul healing as well. So, and I'll explain that more as we talk because I think that will unfold.
Fascinating. And clinical health psychology gets into the study of why people get sick in the first place, does it not? Is that part of its
Yes, and
practice?
yes, and I'm really glad you brought that up because it is about sickness. I was a professor at medical school, and one of the things that I learned very quickly, both in my training and in trying to teach others, is that the medical field, the psychological fields focuses so much on sickness, but they don't really focus on wellness. And so, yes, it's about what is, quote, wrong with a person and what has been broken down in a person, or what is, I use the word misaligned, but, what the illness is. And, that's where I switch it, honestly, into, okay, this is about wellness, and all of your manifestations of psychological concerns to me are really just cues from your soul that something is misaligned, and that is your cue. Any discomfort is a cue to basically pull back, evaluate. I talk about looking at the big screen and then tuning into that soul part of you to help you understand what it is that is in your soul path. You used the word soul path earlier. That needs to be misaligned or realigned, because that's all it is to me, is a misalignment. I really don't like diagnoses.
Yeah, and it's sort of become popular in the light work community, disease versus dis-ease, that
Correct.
this idea that sickness emulates from dis-ease versus necessarily maybe bacteria per se, or, you
Right.
know,
Or
yeah,
biology. Yes.
yeah, biology. Thank you. That was the word I was reaching for. At what point, I think you mentioned it, but you could say it again. What point did you then start to integrate spirituality into your scientific practice?
So it's an interesting question, because I actually have to think back to that. Spirituality has been a part of my life as long as I can remember, but it has built over time, and I've understood more over time. But I was also fortunate enough to, and I think it was my second year in my doctoral program, we actually had formed a spirituality research group. And there were probably 7 or 8 students within my doctoral program that were very interested in the whole, spirituality and psychotherapy practice. And we presented at conferences, and we did panel discussions. And so that was where it became formalized. But it was really talking about much more about religion and psychotherapy. And, because that's really all of that was about as much as could be tolerated within a scientific field at the time.
That
So
was my next question. Yeah. How tolerated was it? Yeah.
yeah, so really, when I look back and look at my own evolution, but then look at, how this unfolded, I feel very, very grateful for that as sort of a start. But one of the other things that happened for me is, it was a very, very difficult time. My third year of my doctoral program was very difficult for me. I had left a very difficult marriage. I had moved. I had a sister that was having some mental health issues. I had all kinds of things that were going on.
Mm.
And one of my friends in the program stopped me in the middle of a conference because she could see how exhausted and worn out I was. And she did Reiki on me. And
Oh.
at the time, I did not know what Reiki was. And
Mm.
it was fascinating because she did Reiki, and I could feel that I'm very receptive and sensitive to energy, but I could feel it just moving through me. And I think that was another one of those things where I was able to understand how things were getting connected. So, really, my spiritual training was sort of an amalgamation of a lot of experiences I had from about probably 28 years ago. So it's beautiful. And what I will say is, when I was in my postdoc, you mentioned my postdoc at University of Missouri, in family medicine, and my research that I did was on spirituality and physicians and what their perceptions were. And then when I moved to the professor position here in North Carolina, it was very similar, where my interests were about holistic health, wellness, complementary medicine, things like that. And that's really where I kind of formalized more of that until I went into private practice. And then my world blew open after I left for my own practice.
Interesting. It's funny because I do see religion come into doctors at times. Like I've lived in the South, and there's been very Christian doctors, and they'll pray for you, but they still don't seem to put together that my soul could be causing the disease. It's like, oh, sorry, you were doomed. God's not favoring on you. You need to, pray more. It's like, so that they're medical and religious, but still there wasn't that assembly that you seem to be.
Right, you're absolutely right. And I know I'm an atypical practitioner, although the beauty is one of the things that's happening for me is I'm having lots of other practitioners find me somehow, just like Noelle found me for your show. The whole idea of they're finding me and asking, how are you doing what you're doing? How did you learn what you're learning or what you're teaching? And how are you, how are you integrating all of this? And so I'm literally creating this network of folks that are kind of coming out of the woodwork really and saying, hey, I want to do more of what you do, or wow, I do this aspect of it. But so it is an evolution right now. And like you were talking, I took a bunch of notes when you were talking earlier, because
Oh,
there is this opening that is happening and it's really beautiful. And it does my heart good, because this is really, to me, what needs to happen for true healing to occur. Because if
yes.
you leave the soul out of your healing, you are leaving probably the most important part, and you are never going to feel 100% like you could. And so
Yes.
it's been really fun for me. And I actually I talked to Noelle about this. I do a little bit of astrology with my certain clients, because if they can understand how their life path is challenged because of how they came into this particular lifetime and what their life lessons are, boy, it blows things open. So it's just really fun to be on shows like yours that can help people put pieces together.
I love it. A couple things came up when you were talking just now. How do you use astrology in with? I mean, do you talk about their Mercury? I mean, we're a bunch of geeks here. In fact, I'll take this moment to tell you guys what her stuff is. Um, Dr. Kelly's at 14-degree Sagittarius, 11-degree Scorpio moon, and a 22-degree Taurus rising. Uranus is on your ascendant right now, my lady. My goodness, we would say you're in a transformation. Yes, the butterfly is about to emerge.
Well,
Um,
yeah, and I texted some colleagues and friends right before the show and said, "Hey, I'm going to be on this show. I have a friend who's an astrologer, in the Midwest," and she said, "Yeah, it's like a butterfly time." I said, "No, for some, it's like a gremlin kind of time, because if you remember the Gremlin show, if those of you who are old enough to know that show, they went through a transformation too, but they weren't. It wasn't a pretty transformation at times, and it can be very uncomfortable." But using that with this conversation, I'm such a Pollyanna. Being a Sagittarius, I'm like the eternal Pollyanna anyway, an optimist. But I really talk to people when they come to me in crisis, but the immediate thing I do is say, how can we use this for your transformation? This is happening for a reason. This is helping you emerge and evolve into something else. So let's look at this as an opportunity rather than, oh my gosh, I'm falling apart, or I'm breaking down or whatever, because that's exactly what this is about. So when I integrate astrology, it kind of comes in different ways. I always keep Mercury in retrograde on my calendar,
right.
because I can guarantee you, and I credit a friend. In fact, I know, and we're here to talk a little bit about past lives. I know this friend, we've discovered that we had this past life in Peru, and I credit her
Wow.
for really helping me understand Mercury years ago, no, probably 18 years ago. But I keep it in my calendar, because I tell people, okay, so Mercury is coming into retrograde. You're going to feel a little unsettled. You might feel like you're falling apart at the seams. And depending on what's happening in their lives, I basically say, okay, so I know this is happening. You might be feeling this. This may go on for you. And inevitably, people are like, oh my God, this is feeling terrible. And so I do the Mercury thing. I do very, very brief, basic charts for people, again, to kind of help them understand their life lessons, what they're supposed to be evolving in and out of in this lifetime. So I'm not an astrologer like you at all, but that's why I refer to as clients to astrologers, because this is part of what I love, is collaborating. So this is fantastic.
I love collaborating too. And I think it's part of the future. We were talking backstage. I think it's what's necessary now. I think it's the essence of how the world will heal is
Yeah,
through all this. We've all been off nerding out in our own expertise. And now it's time to trade notes and see if God is one, then we all are seeing the same thing from a different perspective. Right. So
right.
understanding it. I have to say to you, and we'll talk about this after the show, but like Chiron is your new best friend. I want to teach you about Chiron, like as far as
Okay.
how revealing it is because it represents the trauma that the soul has been born with. and also the old, the what's necessary to heal, which is super fascinating. And I agree with you. It's like if you heal the body and you don't heal the soul, I feel the body will be reinfected, because the
Yeah.
soul is the essence of who we are. It is our body is the embodiment of our soul. So to work on one and not the other, to me, is just a waste of time. But it seems like, with all due respect to your industry, that there's some sort of there's definitely a benefit for people staying sick. Like,
Oh, yeah.
not you specifically. I'm speaking just Western medicine at large. Yeah.
No, I absolutely agree with that, which is frankly why I had to leave my position at the medical center when I was teaching, because within a very short, to me, initially, it was like my dream job. Okay, I get to teach physicians how to do more of what I do and how to understand this. But they live in boxes that are
Yeah.
really teeny tiny.
Yeah.
And I obviously can't live in a box. I'm good at
You're a
breaking.
Sag. No
Yeah,
way.
I'm a Sag that's very determined because of my Taurus, and I'm very
Yes.
passionate because of my Scorpio. So yeah, I'm going to come out of that thing like the Tasmanian devil. Um, so so I do think that the boxes are cracking open. And when I wrote The Healer's Path a couple of years ago, I talked to my book coach about it, and I said to her, I have to use my soul health model to teach practitioners how to rebuild their lives after COVID, because number one, and you said it earlier, and I appreciate the fact that you said this astrologically speaking too. People who have been through trauma don't want to deal with it right away. They basically want their lives to feel like they're getting back to normal. That's their main mission, is to get back to normal, and it usually seeps out or crashes out later. So it's interesting that you said that astrologically, because I told her no matter when I publish this book, it's going to be a few years at least before practitioners are ready. So,
Mm.
and the other thing that I told her is that something's going to crack open in more of these practitioners because of this pandemic. And I have had more and more, and it's been beautiful because I love working with healthcare providers, but I've had more and more healthcare providers of all different specialties contact me for soul healing practices. I'm coaching a few around the country. In fact, I spoke with another psychologist today, and she was asking me a question, and I said, well, I need to tell you, actually, what you're talking about is past life stuff. And I kind of laid it out for her because, again,
Wow.
I could tune into what was happening for her. And so then she says, well, I want a session. So this was someone who we were just basically, we had found each other, and she wanted to have a conversation about how I do what I do. So, I think, and I told her this, I think as practitioners start realizing they've got to heal their own stuff, it's going to help them realize that there is more. But I think more and more people, it's beautiful, more and more people, practitioners are starting to say, hey, I want a piece of that. I want to do more of that. And so it's been really fun to have all these practitioners come to me, find me, because I definitely think this is a revolution. I think this soul thing is going to get much more into mainstream.
I pray so. Interesting,
Yeah.
because I'm always amazed when I do a reading and I don't meet the person till the moment of the reading, and they're a medical doctor or they're a psychologist. I'm always like, what? Like, I'm humbled by it. And it seems that many in the profession of practitioners, they went into it because they wanted to heal.
Right.
Ultimately, and it was sort of like by having patients, they were just sort of never always working on themselves into perpetuity. Right.
Right.
That seems to be, and some very strong-willed would rather do it themselves than seek out professional help. So become the professional versus, taking their own medicine at first. But I'm definitely seeing that change.
And Christopher, I think you're absolutely right. And, that's one of the things I say in my Healer's Path book, is that practitioners have a protocol for everything but themselves. They,
Yeah.
they, they're so outwardly focused, and some of that is protective. And I think some of that is how they are trained, and I will say this, and I have a place in my heart and soul for healthcare practitioners in general, especially during COVID. Because the other thing, oh, sorry, my dog
Yeah.
just woke up.
That's cute.
One of
Yeah.
my dogs.
Make a little cameo. It's a
Yeah,
Leo dog. Just
she's
kidding.
like, I want to be on. She hears soul stuff every day, so she just joining in a little bit. But the thing is, most healthcare practitioners are afraid to go for mental health treatment because, especially physicians, if they report, if it is on their insurance that they have gone for anxiety or depression, they have to report it to their state licensing board.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yes. So, and whenever they, and I have to basically answer questions about it. And so it's one of those fascinating things because even during COVID, I interviewed about 150 healthcare providers from around the country and Canada. And one of the first things they say is, we can't talk about this. They thanked me for interviewing them because it helped them have a place to really talk because they don't feel comfortable in most cases going to a mental health practitioner. So it's really complicated. So it's really, in some ways, it's an honor when someone does contact me either for therapy or for a soul healing service, because at least I know I can kind of offer them something they're not going to get or not willing to get elsewhere.
Yeah, it's nice you wear both of those hats so they can sort of go in through, the alley door.
Yeah.
I can see and get
Yeah.
help or treatment.
And the good thing too is that people find me, and what's really interesting is I don't know how they're finding me. It's like I've never advertised, so it's some reason we're supposed to be doing this.
Yeah, heavenly sent, most likely.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're on
Yeah.
some sort of roster in heaven and being referred. And I want to talk about past lives in that aspect too, but I want to sort of set up the foundation of your work, which I think is the soul health model. Can you tell me what the soul health model is and the 10 branches?
Yes, and I brought my props because this is the thing.
Yay.
So my soul health model, I tell people if I was going to get a tattoo, this would be the only thing I would never get tired of. Yeah. Created this thing about 18 years ago. And basically, and I have to tell a very quick story about it. When I was in my training, again, like I said, I was learning about sickness. And yet at the same time, I was working for the student health promotion department of that same university, and I was learning about wellness. And I realized, wait a minute, if I change my approach to doing therapy, I'm probably going to get further. But the models that were out there were lacking a significant number of components that I was hearing in therapy every day. So I'm going to show you my model. I'm hoping it's not going to glare too much with the light.
Yes. Looks like a tree of knowledge, very Sagittarius.
Yeah, of course. And I love the fact my graphics person captured this perfectly, because these hands, if you really look at these branches,
Yeah, their hands.
and I wanted something that showed the sustainable part of the soul, because the soul is what gets us through everything. The soul is what makes us want to survive. It's that fight or flight. You mentioned that earlier. And it's what keeps us fighting. So I try to help people understand that light within sometimes gets dampened because of the human condition. But if we can work on making sure our branches are balanced, then we're going to get somewhere. Now, I have to show this one because it's really fun. Most people come to me feeling like this.
Wilted. Yeah.
So my job is to help educate them with these 10 branches to get them really understanding from a strategic perspective that once they start working on one or more of these branches to rebuild whatever the trauma or the difficulty or the loss or whatever, then each one of those branches starts to improve and become much more radiant. It brings your tree back to life when you consciously work on whatever it is. And when you bring the soul into it, when you really help people understand that light within, that essence of who we are is here to evolve, and that the difficulties we go through are there for us, not against us.
Yeah.
Then you can turn it around and help people really create a much better path for themselves. And so again, I know I'm a different kind of bird because I don't focus on sickness. I focus on the evolution someone can experience as they go through their difficulties.
Yeah, what I love about your approach is it reminds me a lot of astrology, I have to say, but that could be me projecting fairness.
That's why I like astrologers.
with the house system and the balance of the wheel and balancing each side of the house, and this what I call states of awareness, I think would be what you call branches. So sure. I see a lot of tremendous overlap, and what I've witnessed with my clients is like there's an overdependence on some branches and they've underdeveloped other branches. And so they're like a wheel that's like spinning with like a lop, as a result. And there's nothing wrong. It's about how much time and energy has been put into one branch or another quite often, and simply that we need all branches to thrive, frankly.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought this up, because really, if you, and this is something I have a whole new book series that I'm starting, but that's something I'm going to lay out there. But if you look at each one of those branches, you can kind of match up which astrological primary sign is playing out.
Yeah.
So, and I have about 200 different versions of how this thing looks in a graphics manual that I have. And, for instance, you've got the intellectual and occupational branch. Well, if you have someone like a Capricorn that is all about work and all about like their mission in that part of their life, well, this whole part is going to be lopsided, because this is going to probably throw out of whack a lot of the relationship stuff and a lot of the other branches. And like you said, learning how, I was listening very closely to the Capricorn part, because I have several Capricorn friends or colleagues, and it's that whole idea of they don't do a lot of self-care, they don't do a lot of self-love kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
that's their biggest misalignment.
Yes.
So you're absolutely right that it overlaps and plays well.
Yeah, they're sort of the main characters of the Industrial Revolution. They throw their inner children into the workforce, and
Yes.
they like made their inner child like join a factory from a young age and starve themselves to death, and then wonder why they're unhappy. It's just like
Exactly.
kind of thing. I'm guilty of the same though, Cappies. That's why I love you. You had mentioned in one of your videos that we cannot really manifest in life until we reach what you call internal wealth, or the soul's wealth. What do you mean by that?
So, and I use the word radiance a lot.
You do. That's another
And
question I have. Yeah.
and so when you have so many layers of the human condition that are on you that are unresolved or unattended to,
Okay.
your inner light, your soul is going to be weighed down. It's going to feel dampened. It's going to feel like it is like struggling to breathe in some ways. And so the fact is, when someone is that buried under the human condition of those layers, and they're not even aware of the fact that they need to attend to their soul, it's almost like the transmittal between your soul and source is going to be muddled. It's not going to be clear. You're going to have a much harder time manifesting, because it's like static, and I call it soul static, that if you have so many things that you haven't dealt with, whether it's this life trauma, past life trauma, relationship issues, misalignment with work, whatever it is, it's like your dial is off, and so you cannot manifest in the same way. And
Yeah.
and so that's why it's so important to either do this life healing or past life healing, because you will either repeat the pattern and come right on back and get started again, or you're going to be very weighed down and unhappy. So the words radiance to me are all about how bright and shiny your soul is compared to what you're doing to deal with things in your human condition.
Fascinating. So soul wealth, and I have a term I call soul capital, which I think is my soul wealth, by the way. I see so many
Okay, I'm going to write that
congruencies
down.
here. Soul capital. Yeah. Because the more wealth you have, the more you can attract. I've also
Yes.
noticed with my clients, like if they have like a self-esteem issue, then they manifest a relationship. That self-esteem issue is reflected in the relationship. You end up attracting or manifesting flawed creations, if you want to use that word, that are reflections of your inner poverty, to use your expression. So
Right.
so you're kind of deforming what you manifest if you're not forming your soul wealth, is what I've noticed.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned the challenge of having other humans on this planet, and you're absolutely right. When I think about being a therapist, I would say at least 95% of the reason people come to therapy is that something is happening interpersonally. Whether it's a coworker, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a parental situation or a child situation. But it is that whole idea of going back to that wealth. It's like you have to, this is just how I help people look at things, is that whenever something is happening in your life, it is absolutely part of your soul's evolution, and it's an opportunity. That's how I try to really help people understand. In the Chinese language, the same symbol for crisis is the same for opportunity.
Huh.
They actually interpret it a tad differently than that, because basically that's kind of the overall generalized sense of what that symbol is. But they use it the same way. It's the very same symbol that they use for crisis and opportunity, but it's basically the true interpretation is that something is about to change when it's used in opportunity. And that's where the transformation, where the evolution part comes from. And I love that, because if people can realize that the challenges, the breakdowns in their life are really trying to break through those multiple layers of muck that are on them, and look at this as, okay, this is going to be a cleaning out period. This is going to be a transformational period. Then their lives can like radiate once they've cleaned out that stuff, whatever the stuff is. It's just, like you said earlier, and I took a bunch of notes to go back, but it's that whole idea of the ego is here to protect us, but it sometimes keeps us from evolving and healing.
Yes,
So
exactly.
I was so glad to hear you say that, because people get the ego very confused, and yes, it catalyzes us, but it catalyzes us to run.
Yeah,
It doesn't catalyze us to sit still and go, wow, let me examine what my soul's trying to tell me right now. So it's an important distinction.
absolutely. And I've also find that it tends to blame the without instead of supporting the within.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Which is this,
Absolutely.
I think that's maybe part of the human condition of, incarnating into evolved, you know, um, what's the word? Apes. We've all evolved
Right.
from animals. We've come from an animal perspective. So I guess it's part of dealing with the animal side of ourself.
Yeah.
So how does radiance play into manifestation in your perspective?
Well, it opens up the energy.
Okay.
That's the thing. It opens up the energy, and I think the other thing with radiance, and I think I'm glad you asked this so I can make this clear. If you are not in contact with your soul, if I in my soul health book, I talk about the fact that to know your soul is to know true health. That is like my favorite saying in that, because when you know your soul and you really are committed to working with that soul energy and using that to help you grow, heal, evolve, that's when it opens up the energy for manifestation to occur. And, I mentioned earlier, all these professionals are coming to me. And I told Universe about 3 years ago, because I knew that I've always known I was supposed to do pretty significant things. And so I take deep breaths when I think about everything that's on my master soul health plan now for people. But I told Universe, it's like, okay, you're going to have to bring this stuff to me. I'm not going to go out beating bushes looking for this stuff. And so I basically made this deal with the universe that you're going to have to bring it to me. That's manifesting. It's basically getting very clear, getting your vision very clear, but then doing your work to get everything else out of the way so it can actually happen. It's not
Gotcha.
saying, hey, I want this perfect situation, and then I'm going to sit on my couch and eat jujubes and watch movies. That's not what it's about. It's basically, this is what I want, but I'm going to do my work to clear out the junk that is holding me back in the human condition, that is creating that soul static. So that radiance is directly connected to our ability to manifest.
I see that. Yes. It's almost like it increases the light that attracts, it
Absolutely.
increases the signal. Radiance is basically the signal and it's
Right.
that you're putting out. So turning that up. What recommendations do you give to clients for how to discover their soul versus their personality per se?
Well, there's some that are very basic. Listening to their gut reaction is basically the voice of their soul. I mean, how many
Okay.
times have any of us dismissed or ignored the voice of our soul, and then our world blows up?
Yeah.
So learning from experience is a great way to say, oh, yeah, this is what happens when I don't. There are also many strategies that I've developed that I use with clients, because everybody's a little different with what opens that door for them.
Yeah.
But I take them on what I call soul walks or soul journeys to help them understand how to talk with that deepest part of them. And a lot of times there's resistance because, well, two things happen. Sometimes there's resistance because they're like, oh gosh, I'm not sure what I'm going to find.
Yeah.
And the other one, which is really beautiful, is that people immediately start crying, and they don't even know why they're crying. And they'll ask me, and I'll say, well, you've missed yourself for so long.
Yeah.
It's like a homecoming. When you make that connection with that inner part of you, and you're like, wow, there I am. It really is like you're reuniting, because your soul has been with you since you were created
Yeah.
through any lifetime. You may not know it, but that soul part of you is such a special part of us. And I think that's why it has. I'm pausing because, like, I don't know, I don't think I decided this was my mission. I think this is my universal soul purpose here. I think this is why I'm back in this lifetime, is to bring this to light in a lifetime that I can actually do that, because in past lifetimes that was not possible. So, but I just think when people can reconnect with that part of themselves, there's such a special, it's like a relationship that it's like you miss yourself. So it's yeah, it's a beautiful part of what I do.
It's very exciting. And it's funny because organized religion, I grew up in a hybrid of Christianity, Buddhism, I know Judaism from friends. It's like, never do we hear the talk about discovering your soul. It's always about your behavior
Never,
and whether or not you're sinning or being good in the outer
never.
world. It's so amazing that these organized religions do not speak to what is the soul. And even Buddha is like, shh, it's like,
Yeah.
shouldn't I be asking? Like, so
Yeah,
it's
and
interesting how
I
it's,
love that you brought that up, because, I'm writing this, so I'm launching this new book series next year, and it's called The Soul of Psychology.
ooh,
And what I'm doing is I'm taking one mental health concern at a time, and I'm educating both practitioners and the public about the soul side of each one of those concerns. So the first one's anxiety. There are so many past life experiences and so many soul wounds that are connected to anxiety. So the first one's anxiety, then I'll have depression, PTSD, grief, and then there's like 12 others that'll come after that. Um, but what's really fascinating about it is, well, one of the things is that, in the history part of the book, the very first part of the book, I talk about, because it makes no sense to me, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, hundreds of years ago, said that the soul is in every aspect of healing, every aspect of who we are. In modern medicine, they never talk about it. They never bring it in.
no.
One of the fathers of psychology, Carl Jung, was the same way. Carl Jung was all about the soul. He was all about, hey, this is how this works out, collective consciousness. Nobody ever talks about the soul.
Yeah.
So it's so fascinating to me. And when you look at ancient civilizations, they were about the soul. They may not have used the word, but they were all about how you get your soul to the afterlife, how you mummify, yourself or your pharaohs, or in South America it was the same. Where that shifted, I'm not really sure, but it disappeared. The word soul disappeared from our language, our use, our everyday language. I don't even know how long ago, but it's the most important part of us as far as I'm concerned. So
I'm
it's
Yeah, I'm fascinated with that also. I mean, and I'm no historian, but it seems that like once Darwin was arguing with the church, science suddenly had to have its own franchise that was divorced from the soul, because it seemed like the church had a monopoly on the soul and science was evolving. And so they had to become they split at that point and have never married since. They've been just arch opponents and not on the same team.
right.
I mean, you have your practitioners like Jung and that disagree, beg to differ, but and it's funny how they can be so separated and not, despite the population and their belief structure. I think we have scientific discovery because our soul led us to that. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like,
Well, and I think that's in the scientific discovery, which is another part that I wrote into this book series, is the whole idea too that the soul can't be measured.
right,
Scientists are trying to measure stuff to prove it, and
right,
there is absolutely no way you can measure the soul.
yeah,
There was one physician years ago, and I mean like 200 years, not 200, but 80 years ago, that tried to measure how much weight the soul has when it leaves the body.
I've heard
And
about this experiment where he's like people are dying on a scale, basically.
yeah,
Oh,
and
fascinating.
it's never been replicated. They can't replicate it. So, it was like, I don't know, 2.5, ounces or something like that. But then it just didn't work. He tried to put that out there. Now there's another set of researchers that measures the aura after, as a person is dying. And that's been kind of interesting because they're using these, um, I don't know what to call them, but they're using these machines to kind of measure the energy around a person's body. And so that information has been coming out in the last 10 or 15 years. But the thing is, everything is energy, and the soul
Yeah.
is the most like perfect kind of energy. And if the scientists would just look at energy, they'd have the answers to how to measure this thing. And not even measure it, but to say, oh, this is real. But I I find it fascinating, and yet again, I look at the universe and I look at, you played out the astrology and how all of this is kind of coming into a new age of awareness. And I just have to assume, okay, so for some reason we're not supposed to, like, we're supposed to be in this place where we are re-establishing the soul as a thing. So, I can get frustrated and at the same time, okay, so this is where we are in our evolution. And I guess we'll just have to live with that as we go forward.
Yeah. I mean, we all know distance makes us heart grow fonder. So maybe we had to leave our soul to really care about it, as far as in our
Yeah.
evolution. Now, one thing really fascinating about you is your inclusion of past lives. You've trained past life regression with Dr. Brian Weiss, who one of his books was Many Lives, Many Masters. How did you get involved with past life regression in your line of work? That's a fascinating leap.
Well, it is and it isn't. This is before I ever did the training, but I was having spontaneous past life memories of my own for years.
Okay.
And it was just kind of putting it all together. And then when I decided to do the training, I was like, well, okay, because I was already doing past life work with clients without trying, because I have lots of soul-based um, strategies that I've created. And it wasn't until, and this was probably, I don't even know how many years ago, this was probably been here 23 years. This was probably about 20 years ago. I was doing a visualization with a client, and she started sharing information about her being in this this whitish gown. And I mean, she just started talking. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's having a past life regression right here. So I have had past life memories for a very long time, but then I'm also, because I believe in credibility and legitimizing all of this, I did go to the training with Brian Weiss because he's the guru. I mean, he is really the person, especially in America. There are some in other countries that are gifted with understanding this as well. But what I early on came to understand is that a lot of the psychological concerns that are experienced today stem from past life traumas, or, and I'm going to say ancestral healing kinds of things, because there's some things that souls have lived through that weren't necessarily like a trauma, like we think of now, but it's traumatic experience. Previous generations and lifetimes were not easy and not pleasant. So whether it was a famine, whether it was um, natural disasters, whether it was basically, starving because the locusts came through, or, so if a soul has had that experience that is laced in their soul's DNA, and a practitioner doesn't know to go there, then that person, you can manage their symptoms, but you can't cure them. Because if
Yes.
the patient doesn't know they're there, and if the practitioners don't know they're there, they can only go so far. And it can get very, very frustrating for really both the practitioner and also the patient if they hit a wall and they've tried everything. And right now all we've got is medications. And so I know, unfortunately, several clients who are on a long list of medications to manage what's going on. But if they were either willing or aware that they could do some of this past life work, then it would clear up a whole lot. Now, I'm not saying everything is past life, and I'm not saying, because this is where complexity theory comes in. There are so many different layers of what happens with a person, and I'll try to remember to say this in a second, because I have another graphic I'm in the midst of creating that I think is going to help a lot of people understand this. But I talk about soul fracturing. I talk about soul wounding. There are many, many different kinds of soul wounds you can have. And you can have past life wounding from relationships that are playing out in this lifetime. Those karmic strands, I call it karmic strands, those energetic strands that you have that are in this lifetime that carry over. If you don't know they're there, and your soul has reincarnated with that other soul, and you're like going to bats all the time because you don't realize there's karmic stuff between you.
Yes.
That in itself is complicated, because a couples therapist, a marriage and family therapist, is not going to get very far if they don't understand the karmic strands that are there. And so sometimes souls aren't meant to be together. More often than not, you're brought together with a particular soul because you are supposed to learn and outgrow that dynamic. So, there's so many different levels of this that are important, and so many layers. And so past life stuff is left and right. I mean, I just think it's so much more layered than most people even know to even scratch the surface with, which is, I guess, is why I've incarnated right now, to help people understand that.
Oh,
So,
we need it so badly. And I love that it's coming in through your practice. I mean, I've come to the recent conclusion in my own work that we're pretty much healing our past life issues until around 50. Like
at
there's
least.
very little new,
Right.
it's almost all, but the flip side is it's such a relief of the burden when you realize, oh, this is just a repeat.
Yeah.
And almost everybody repeats like a minor version of it, and then this lifetime's infraction becomes the focus of it, and so there's a lot of lack of forgiveness. But when you realize, oh, this has been your pattern for lifetimes, and you're finally waking up to it,
Right.
it allowed me to forgive myself so much easier than, because you didn't mean to make. A lot of times when I've gone through past life things, it's like you go, I don't want to say temporary insane, but something subconscious takes over,
Yes.
and you find yourself behaving a way you never thought you'd behave. You say stuff you never thought you'd imagine saying, and you can't even, what, I don't know,
Yeah.
what dragon just came out of me, and
That you're
when you
wounding.
realize, oh, that's subconscious, it's
Yeah.
past life, you're
Yeah.
reacting because that person stabbed you in the back in the past life, like, oh, no wonder.
Right.
No wonder I never trusted her, or whatever, kind of,
Right.
or him. It's fascinating.
Well, and one of the things, I think this is a great, boy, we could talk forever, but
We
this
could.
is, when women come to me and they say, gosh, I just don't understand. I just, I have all this anxiety about sex, and I don't feel like I was sexually abused or traumatized in this lifetime. I'm like, well, if you're a female soul, you've probably had sexual trauma in past lifetimes. And so then the light goes on for them that it doesn't have anything to do with this lifetime. It could be previous lifetimes, or men right now. And it's really beautiful, because a lot of masculine souls, and I say masculine souls because you can be a female in this lifetime but have a male soul, and vice versa, depending on what
Yes.
lessons you're supposed to be learning. But right now, masculine male souls are like starting, like that heart space is starting to crack open, and they don't know what to do with it, because they've been trained for so many lifetimes to keep it in, and not really have that openness, and not experience. And so there's this huge evolution happening that is very difficult, but also beautiful, because it is that, it's a mixture between opening the heart space as part of your evolution, so that we can get back to that self-love piece, and that love consciousness piece, which is exactly what we're here for in this era. But there's a lot of people who don't know what to do with it. And so it's understanding the bigger layers of what's happening too.
Yeah, I'm noticing with the gender fluidity that's happening right now,
Yes.
is really compelling, because it's like, one, we're paying attention to our soul very publicly, saying, hey, my soul is not this body. So they're making distinctions between the soul and the body, whereas that has not happened before. But also, to some degree, I
Yeah.
question, how much is it memory of the time I was a woman coming through,
Precisely.
memory of the time I was a man. And it's like, well,
Precisely.
what's the appropriate response to that? Do we, how do we honor that? Don't we all have multiple gender lifetimes, where we've flipped different biological, genders? And part of this, I think rise in transgenderism to some degree might be just the awakening of past lives where we were the other gender.
Oh, it
Is that
absolutely is. It absolutely is. And I can give you many examples. I'll give you one in particular. I have a client who was she's a highly skilled professional, PhD level, um, and she was referred to me by a psychiatrist that I work with. And I think it was the second time she was in my office. This was right before COVID. Um, she had a daughter who realized she was a male and needed to basically be male. And this client had a very difficult time with it because she was brought up very religious, and she loved her child. She was going to love her child, but she was having a very hard time with it. And I knew she had been pretty active in her church from what she had told me in the intake. And she says to me, or we're talking, and she said, yeah, my church said I could keep coming to church, but that my son couldn't.
Mm.
And so then you add the layer of what I call church hurt and God trauma, because all of a sudden her idea of spirituality is blown out the window, and she's suddenly being wounded by this church that was supposed to be supportive of her. So she's talking, and I said, and she was trying to figure out how she could reconcile this with her son. And I said, well, I don't want to step on spiritual toes, but I want to give you another way to look at this.
Mm-hmm.
And I said almost exactly what you just mentioned, that when I said to her, your son was probably a male in many lifetimes before, and he's just trying to get back to who he was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I see her kind of put her eyes down, and all the while I'm going, oh boy, here I go. I stepped on some toes. And I was just trying to be very mindful and patient. And she looks at me and she said, that is the first thing that makes sense.
Mm.
And I was like, shoo. But
Ooh,
it was one
yeah.
of those
So
things.
touchy. So many bombs there. Religion, sexuality, gender.
And I don't want to step on spiritual toes, but she's
Right.
like, oh my gosh, that really is the first thing that makes sense. And so it cracked a huge seal for her to realize she just wanted to love him. She just didn't know how to shift it in her mind. But after that, I mean, we did a little bit more work, but man, she and her family are so close again, and they're very supportive, and he's thriving, and and he's going through the surgeries to change, and she's like completely supportive. I've said that to many, many clients, because that is exactly what this gender thing is there, you're just trying to be true to your soul, and you just happen to choose to come in as, and I'm not going to say the wrong gender, because I think this is also related to love consciousness, that I think the souls that are here that are doing these transition surgeries and living, excuse me, as the souls they're supposed to be, they're here to crack seals for love consciousness, for people to be accepting, for people to realize, wait, why am I, trying to control this person's soul when they're just being who they are. So I think it's another part of this consciousness movement that these souls chose to come in to say, damn it, I'm going to crack this seal. It's going to be really hard to do it this way. But so,
Yeah.
yeah,
To
that
be
might be the
innovators and
Sagittarius in me.
pioneers, and also just revealing the fluidity of soul, fluidity of spirit, fluidity of incarnation, and fluidity of gender. I mean, I have a lot of gay friends, and in a gay relationship, quite often one will sort of take more yin and one will take more yang.
Yeah,
And then I've known them for 20 years. They've switched. The yin
yeah,
became the yang became the yin in the
yeah,
relationship. So it's
yeah.
like, it's something that I think we're always we're always becoming, like the soul is always in the process of becoming something, I think, else, or growing something else, or awakening something else. Like this idea that this is who you are, and like this, that your
Right,
DNA wrote you, is just nonsense, especially in the idea of creation. If you're in creation, then you're constantly recreating yourself, are we not?
right. Oh, that's what evolution's all about. You mentioned Darwin earlier. I've been obsessed with Darwin's theory for actually since middle school, but it's that whole idea of evolution. And I use that word left and right on my website and the work I do and the clients that I work with, because and I always say, evolution never comes without discomfort. If we weren't uncomfortable, there would be no catalyst, there'd be no impetus, there'd be no reason for us to grow. So yes, our angst and our frustration and our pain is really part of trying to poke us in the butt to get us to do something different. So yeah, that evolutionary path is part of it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've personally never believed that it was survival of the fittest that pushed evolution. I always felt it was the soul wanting more, pushing the cells to evolve, pushing to come out of the sea. The
Yeah.
soul, that's my personal belief on the matter. But
But can I add something to that?
Yes, please
That
do.
most people don't know, because halfway through Darwin's research, he changed that. And most
Did he
people
really?
don't know that. Yeah, halfway through his research, he changed it from survival of the fittest to those who adapt the best.
Oh,
So
fascinating.
it's all about, how do I adapt? How do I evolve? And so it was about halfway through his research that he changed that. And so, but we remember him for what he first put out there, because it was basically groundbreaking at the time. But as he was doing his research, he's like, wait a minute, I'm wrong here. This is about those who adapt the best.
Was he a God-fearing man? I don't even know. I don't. Was he pure science, or do you not know? I may be
I
putting you on the
don't,
spot there.
I'd have to go back and look. I'm not sure I've ever read anything about that, but what I do know, what he feared being on a boat. And what did he do? He was on a boat. He was seasick all the time. He was fearful of being in boats. And so I found it fascinating that he planted himself in the Galapagos Islands to study things, because he had to go from boat to boat, or from island to island on a boat. So
Wow.
he spent a lot of his world seasick, because he was just really uncomfortable. So, I find it fascinating when I learn little, tips or information about that, with what our scientists have gone through in order to learn what they did. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, I'm
and
curious. Now I'll go back and look to see if he was God fearing. I have no idea.
I'm going to go back and look at his astrology.
Yeah, please tell me.
Because whenever I talk about phase fields, I always look back and like, what were they? To me, it's a real eye opener, and understanding brings such a perspective,
Oh
and that
gosh.
and that root intention that's behind it. Well, I could talk to you for just about all day long, I think. Let me ask you a couple quick questions to wrap up. One is, what is your approach to facing the soul's trauma? Um,
So of course I meet people where they're at. So if that's the challenge, because some people are ready to do the deep dive, some of them aren't, and so of course I'm very much about meeting people where they are in their evolution, and so I have to answer it that way, because there's a lot of clients that come to me and they don't really know the soul language, so I'll start kind of throwing it in there, and then all of a sudden they're like, whoa, let's go with this. And others that come to me and they want to do the deep dive. So I have to say that. And I want to point this out. I also keep therapy, although I integrate what I do, I'm also very clear that, I have to keep it somewhat separate, because we do live the human condition part of us, and we live the soul condition part of us. And so the strategies they overlap, but they're a little bit different, because a lot of the human strategies are about changing the mindset. So that's where things like EMDR come in. That's where thought changing. That's where EFT. There's a lot of strategies that are basically to help change the mindset. So that's the human part of it. But when those aren't enough, and they often aren't, that's where the soul healing comes in. And so either I do readings for them, or sometimes we do these soul walks where I did 2-hour session with someone yesterday, very intense, help them walk through some past trauma and help them kind of identify what was keeping them blocked. And she is a retired college professor. And so that's always fun, because I've done this a few times with her. She has a very deep level of anxiety and depression from some trauma in this lifetime, but now she's starting to open up and realize it's past life stuff too. And after the session, she's like, it's so hard for my research brain to understand that this stuff is real. And I said, well, I understand that, but every time we do this, you feel better, and another layer comes off. And she's like,
Right.
yes, I can't deny that. And so there's lots and lots of strategies that I use, and I'm like a toolbox girl where I'll pull out a tool when I see I'm pretty intuitive with what the person needs at the time. So sometimes it's a soul walk, sometimes it's a past life regression, sometimes it's a Akashic reading, sometimes it's I do soul realignment sessions too. I also do energy work, so I can kind of sense a person's energy. So it's really dynamic depending on where the person is. So this is a really hard question for me to ask and help have people understand it, which is why I'm writing these books, because it's hopefully gonna help illuminate a lot for people.
I think you did an excellent job, because I think I completely concur. Like the physical body has all of its, let's say, symptoms that are separate from the soul's understanding and learning too. And they do seem to be two schools or two different appointments anyways, like,
Well,
two different practitioners.
And the subtitles, well, I shouldn't say subtitles, the titles of these books are, for instance, Anxiety, Treating Body, Mind, and Soul. And so we do manifest physical symptoms in our bodies from, say,
Yes.
anxiety, PTSD, grief, whatever. Then we have the mind kind of stuff, so the thoughts about those kinds of concerns. And then we have the soul level, which is what most people really don't know about. So I talk about the 3 levels of healing in these books. And I will say this because I think this will kind of encapsulate some of this for you, is I talk about the energetic imprint or wound or scar that is left on a person's soul when there's been trauma or extended wounding. And it's like I'm trying to remember, my brain, it's a little late, so my brain is getting tired. It's like a fingerprint. If you don't dust for a fingerprint, you don't know it's there. If you don't even know to dust for the fingerprint, you don't know it's there. It's the same with the soul. It's a latent image. That's the word I was looking for. The latent image is still on the soul if that soul is wounded. And no matter what traditional methods you go through, you may not know to look for that latent image that is on the soul. So that's where soul healing comes in. That's where practitioners who understand this are necessary to get to these deepest levels. And, that's why, again, I think universe has created this interesting journey for me, because that's one of the other things I'm doing next year is launching certifications for healthcare providers, coaches, educators, administrators, to learn more about this stuff, so that they, at least, even if they're not the ones to do the training or do the healing work, that they will be trained enough to go, oh, wow, I need to refer to someone. Because I'll tell you, no one can do everything, but at the same time, unless we illuminate this as a necessary part of the healing, we're not going to heal the world, like you said earlier. I mean, the soul has so many wounds on it from the multiple lifetimes. And let me say it this way, because this is a motivator. Not only is this what's going to heal the world, but this is the only thing that might keep us from having to come back.
Well,
and that is a motivator. If you don't want to come back, well, you better darn well do your healing, because you will be back if you don't.
It seems so, because there's an attachment, and that's where Buddhism has really enlightened us, is those attachments keep us in prison. So I think our soul's attached to trying to get it right. So it's something that until you heal it, the soul will keep coming back.
Well, and it's the only way to get back to source, and so that's the thing, is if we don't do our healing work, if we don't learn that pure self-love and that honoring of soul, it's a revolving door. We're gonna come back. And I don't know many people who have been through a lot in their lifetimes who really want to do this over again.
Yeah. What final message do you have for our viewers? I mean, seeing what you see in where we are today.
Well, I'm speaking to the choir, luckily, because, I think the thing is, everybody, you obviously, and everybody that watches the show already believes at least in part about this stuff. If I were going to say any take home, is make sure you're doing your work. Make sure, if you do have wounds, if you have something that's unresolved, if you have something that you're tripping over, but you don't know what it is, know that it is probably soul-based. It is probably something that is imprinted on you at such a deep level that even from a consciousness perspective, unless you know how to access that, you're not going to get past it. And the second thing I would say is tell your friends, help them understand this, help the world understand that there's something deeper going on here, because I think this is I think resurrecting the soul to that mainstream, to the focal point of health, is really the only way we're going to get past all of the healthcare problems we're having in the world, as well as our own personal kind of stumbling.
Well said. Yes. I think, and you brought so much illumination. I want to thank you for being who you are and being
Oh,
on
thank you.
this planet at this time and bring your Sag brilliance to the table and changing the conversation. We're putting up your website right now. For someone who's just getting to know you, anything you recommend they navigate to on your website? We've also put it in the chat, the links a few times too.
Sure. The one thing I would say is glance through the website, see what works for you. There are lots of videos that are going to be coming out. I have this whole, I call it my Master Soul Health Plan. So there's a lot more YouTube videos that are going to be coming out. There's a lot more. If you want to join my newsletter, I do a monthly newsletter, and that's going to ramp up quite a bit as well, because there's more videos that will be placed on there. But if you're a practitioner and you're looking for trainings, let me know, because again, I'm trying to help other people understand how to do this work, because as they say, it takes a village. Well, I think it's going to take more than a village for this all to happen. And I know there's only one of me, and I don't believe in cloning. So
Oh, good. That's a whole
yeah, I
nother
don't
show.
believe
We'll
in
talk,
cloning.
bring that up next time. So, she's got tremendous resources on her YouTube channel. She has done a Wednesday check-in for a long time there. There's a huge history of stuff where she's discussing all these concepts. So check her out. It's Dr.KatherineT.Kelly.com. And thank you so much for being a part of it. I've been watching the chat. People have loved your presence and your energy. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Well, thank you all, and keep on growing and healing. I'll tell you, it's this human condition is worth overcoming.
It is. And I think if we join hands, we can do it together. So it's nice
Absolutely.
to know
And
you're
thank
out
you for
there.
the work you do as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'll see you after backstage here in just a moment.
Perfect.
Okay, great.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye for now. Well, folks, that was amazing. I love talking to her. The only takeaway I have with these shows is that I could go for another hour, honestly, and you guys know I could. But we'll just wrap up here. Sirius Joy is the only astrology service that I know of that actively loves you 7 days a week. It's all about the love at Sirius Joy. That's at SiriousJoy.com for just $3.99. We have an amazing program coming up, folks. Sharing is caring. But we have an amazing program coming up here. It's called the 40 Days of Truth and Purpose. It is starting on October 23rd. And this is going to be us walking you through your entire chart from A to Z. It's going to be a handheld ability to read your chart. You're going to understand the step system like the back of your hand because you're going to know your chart like the back of your hand. In 40 days, we're going to use the 30 days of Scorpio. Scorpio is the only time of the year where it's really hard to lie to yourself, right? So we've designed this program to go over the course of Scorpio, completely aligned with the energy of each day, exploring parts of your soul, parts of yourself to the core, to the bone, and then moving into Sagittarius all the way up to Grandmaster Step 12 Sagittarius to understand what your purpose is. Everyone always comes to me in a reading, what is my purpose? This 40-day program, which starts on October 23rd, will walk you through your truth and purpose. I'm looking forward to teaching it. Our entire team is surrounding around this. It's going to be phenomenal. By the way, if you are a subscriber, if you're going to be a new subscriber, we currently have right now live our Lights of the Round Table show. It went live last Wednesday. All of our practitioners were on, except for Heather. I hope she's feeling better. But we all came on. We talked about uniting the light as being the theme. Also, the individual mega monthly October reports will be live this Sunday. So I do a 15 to 20 minute report for each of the 12 signs on what October will be for you. Coming up this week in our soul support group, we have Angel Intervention starring angel reader Devin Dewar and Heather Exposito. This is a show where Devin does a live angel reading for 3 subscribers who are stuck in a dilemma. By the way, the angels are very efficient. Anyone who watches this show is also having their answers questioned because that's how the angels really work. It is live this Wednesday on SiriusJoy.com at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, exclusively on SiriusJoy.com. Sharing is caring. People always ask, what can you do for me? Just share us with your friends and family. That's the greatest thing you can possibly do. Introducing us to our show and now Astro Mingle and eventually maybe SiriusJoy.com. But sharing is caring. We appreciate it. Some people do want to donate, and I do humbly accept donations. That's at paypal.me/Sensei Christopher. If you want to buy your sensei a cup of coffee, I will take a sip and bow to you. A great way to stay in touch with us is our Facebook club. We have a Facebook club called the Sirius Joy Club. You can get there by going to SiriusJoy.club. The only rules we have is that you must be compassionate and not talk politics. All light workers are welcome to do live streams and sell their goods and services in this club. We are open market for spirituality. If you want to follow us on social media, we do have a linked tree. It's at SiriousJoy.social. Every Sirius Joy link. Be sure to get on our newsletter. We do a newsletter once a week. We do not cram your email with spam, and it is all about what's going on. It's a summary of this show. It's a summary of the 12 signs. So if you didn't take notes, we took them for you. We'll email them to you every week. Join our email newsletter at SiriousJoy.social. And some people would rather listen instead of watch. So we are on many different podcast platforms. Right now, we are on Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. Just search for Namaste Today. All right, friends, it's been another fantastic show. I want to say thank you to our producer, Noel Way. Thank you to our director, Sarah Lyman. Thank you to our guest today, Dr. Katherine.T.Kelly. And thank you to my entire Sirius Joy staff and team. I'm grateful for all of you. We are doing this together. We are an example of uniting the light, and we have so much farther to go. Until next week, I love you. Live, love, be.